Thank you to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So right here I'm showing you guys a little sneak peek into my sketchbook, as I wanted to do another little mini comic today. So how I technically plan everything out is doing some quick thumbnailing in my sketchbook first, and once I kind of have like my panels and everything down, I switch over and do kind of like 2 pages per little sticky note so that I can get a better sense of how I want things to be formatted. And usually this is kind of like when I solidify kind of the format. So on the right hand side, I actually have 2 little doodles of my OC Akemi, which is the one that's closer to the top, and then my OC Sato, which is the one with the pigtails, because that is who we are going to be drawing today for our comic. I'll talk about like kind of like the context of the comic a little bit later, but for now, let's go ahead and talk about our formatting, because there's a lot of things I forgot how to do, as well as learned what I should do in the future for planning out some comics. So right off the bat, I am using Clip Studio Paint, and they have a kind of like comic feature. On the left-hand side of the little comic portion, you can do like a webtoon-esque kind of format as well, so it depends on what you like. So I went ahead and changed the amount of pages that I was planning to have. You can also change the binding and the size of your pages. So I decided to do this as I think 5x7, so like around an A5 sized canvas, and it already sets up my bleeds and like any of the trims and stuff. And I went ahead and used the Clip Studio Paint tools to set up all of my boxes, and I can use some of the I guess they're tools that allow you to break your frames into smaller templates, I guess. I don't remember all the terminology because I'm not really into comic making or like manga making, I guess, but in the future I'll try my best to learn. I'll probably circle it on the screen, but there is a function for Clip Studio Paint that allows you to change your layer colors to be a very specific color, I guess. I think more so people who do like drafting probably use this, or like animations or something. So basically, regardless of what color I'm using, it will change it to this blue color. So in my color wheel in the top right hand side, you can see that initially I was using black for the entirety of the sketching, but my sketch turns out to be blue because of the way that my layer is set out. Now, the mistake that I wanted to kind of like address at the very beginning is the fact that when I was setting up my page, and maybe I'll put a screenshot of this on the screen for you guys so you have a better idea of what I'm talking about, you can kind of set your comic to be full color. So you can have like your full color range, or if you want to do, I don't know, like a very specific color palette or something, probably choose this option or you're going to have a heck of a time like I did a little bit later trying to change the colors. Number 2, I think, is monochromatic. So you have your black and white, and the other one I think is called gray, which is what my kind of comic setting was set at. I didn't think I was going to be changing any colors because I thought I was going to leave everything pretty monochromatic, but for the sake of like Valentine's Day or like a romantic theme or feeling, I wanted to change everything to be more of like a pink aesthetic. So I had to do a workaround and change every new layer that I made to color instead of gray, so it allowed me to use like color on top of my layers. Otherwise, gray kind of just allows you to have the full grayscale at your disposal. So if I pick like a blue color, it will just basically take out all the saturation and have it set to a specific gray of the same value as my blue color that was chosen. So yeah, it was a little bit annoying, but luckily for the sketching portion, it wasn't too bad. And once I got into the swing of things, everything kind of like worked out in the very end. So I'll be showing you a little bit later how I change all my line colors and format everything. So the first portion is just going to be me sketching out our little scenes. Now I'm going to try my best not to spoil the entire comic, so you'll be seeing mostly frames and scenes from the first half of the comic, as I only did 12 pages, which I'm always shocked that some people can do so many pages for like webtoons, comics, and all that stuff in full color. It boggles my mind because this is so time consuming. Also, this is kind of like how I like to format everything. I like to keep the sticky note with my thumbnails on the upper left, and then I will go ahead and kind of like sketch out everything by planning out the the frames or like the paneling how I want it and how I've kind of set it up in my little sticky note at the very top. And then once I'm done with these 2 pages, I'll swap them out so that I don't have to keep looking back and forth from my sketchbook. So I think this is like the first real attempt of doing more of like a comic in Clip Studio Paint after I expressed that I wanted to do more mini comics for my OCs. I think the other ones that I've done were both traditionally in my sketchbook, and then other attempts were just me playing around and trying to figure out line work, which is going to be I don't know. I always have like mixed feelings about doing inking, but for the most part, sketching went by pretty smoothly. I think I always leave out a lot of details when it comes to like planning and sketching, so I have a harder time doing the line art. But I feel like if you have a very solid sketch, it probably makes it a lot easier for you to translate your lines like the way you want them to look into your line art. So I'm going to be finishing up the sketching and then we can move on to the inking. So before we start with the inking, let me introduce you to TokyoTreat and Sakuraco. TokyoTreat is a fun and exclusive Japanese snack box featuring unique and exclusive flavors straight from Japan. Each box is filled with a variety of full-size Japanese snack items like limited edition Kit Kats, unique flavored Japanese chips, and even occasional Japanese sodas that are only available in Japan for a limited time. You can tell that this is kind of like a Valentines themed box as it's kind of pink and red with like a lot of snacks that are also pink and red too. While Sakuraco is a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local Japanese snack makers, each box comes with 20 traditional, authentic, and artisan Japanese snacks, including Japanese teas and a special Japanese tableware. I always find that the snacks from Sakuraco tend to fit my palate quite well. And in this box, it seems to have like a lot of chocolate and strawberry themed snacks, which is perfect for the month of February. The box also includes a plum furoshiki, which is a wrapping cloth, which is meant to help you carry your belongings. And this one is a very kind of like dusty rose color, which I think is really pretty. Both boxes come with a 24-page cultural guide, and I love that it includes information regarding ingredients and allergens of each of the snacks. But also, it informs you of little tidbits of information revolving around culture and tradition in Japan. You can kind of learn a little bit more about how Japan celebrates Valentine's Day and even White Day. Each month has a different theme, meaning that you get to try out a whole new selection of new treats and snacks every month. For example, TokyoTreat's theme for the month of February is Sweet Valentine, while Sakuraco's box is Valentine's Delights. So now it is time for some tea. I don't think I've ever tried a tea like this before, so I was very excited to try out this caramel hojicha. It has like a very forward caramel tea flavor, so I think if you like something with caramel flavor that is not like typically coffee, then I think this tea is perfect for you. It almost gives like a caramel mocha vibe to me, so has a little bit less caffeine as well, so that's a plus for me. Other than the tea being my favorite, I think this month's Kit Kat is also one of my favorites by far, which is just a combination of milk and white chocolate together. I also really enjoyed the sweet potato sticks as it has a very strong kind of like roasted sweet potato flavor in this kind of like small tiny size. Also, the chocolate karinto from the Sakuraco box was also very lovely. I've had like a bunch of these before, but not really a chocolate flavored one, so this was kind of a surprise. If you like to get a box for yourself or want to give these as a lovely gift to your special someone, by the way, I think you should treat yourself this month, so grab a box. But check out the links in the description if you want to get your boxes today. Thank you again to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to that line art. So now that we moved on to our line art in inking, I went through a bunch of different brushes to figure out what kind of like texture or what kind of look I wanted for the inking to kind of look like. In the end, I ended up with using just the, I think it's the Real G Pen. So there is a difference between the G Pen and the Real G Pen. The G Pen has like very much no texture. It's kind of like your typical round, sharp, kind of tapered brush, while the Real G Pen is basically the same thing, but it kind of has a little bit of this grittier texture, which is kind of fun. And as always, I always mention my disdain towards doing line art just because I personally struggle with it. So let me talk about the setup a little bit. So For some of the frames, I will be putting I don't know why I keep calling them frames. For some of the panels, I will end up putting the kind of like a second view of the panel that I'm working on into a smaller window so I can kind of see an overview to see kind of how it looks overall instead of zooming in to see all the details, because sometimes I get kind of like a one-track mind and I get really into just doing the details. Another benefit of having these blue lines for my sketch is that I don't really get too, I guess, like distracted or have too much of a hard time interpreting, I guess, my sketch as much as if I just was like to work in black and then I'm inking with black and then trying to lower the opacity and stuff. I could definitely leave it as more of that lighter blue color and just ink on top and not really need to lower the opacity. You can also change the colors to be something else. I think I just learned about this feature because I was watching a Drawfee live stream and I think Karina was talking about it and I thought it was kind of neat to use. So I'll probably be doing this a little bit more so often when I'm sketching like for something that needs like a rough draft and a final draft, or if I need to do inking and line art, I'll probably use that kind of like layer property to change it so it has a good distinct contrast, I guess. So for the line art, I'm always iffy about it. So sometimes I enjoy my line art a little bit more when I'm working traditionally. I don't know if it's because like I do have a little bit of that automatic sense of just wanting to do certain things for line art, like thickening up some lines or like adding a little bit of hatching here and there. But whenever it comes to like digitally lining something, I tend to struggle a little bit more. I don't know if it's because like I will always think that the next step will fix up everything instead of like relying on my line art to be like a main component of my art, if that makes sense. So in this case, I don't think I really figured out the lighting before I did the line art. So for kind of like this particular style where I feel like the line width variation, or if you're using a lot of hatching or black, it's good to have a good sense of where your lighting is so that you can utilize the line width variation or adding values, kind of like darker areas right off the bat, so you know the sense of lighting before you add in your values, because there are some areas, especially because I do default where the neck connects to like the jawline and chin, I do kind of like make a certain point to be darker, but a lot of my lighting actually needs it to be on the opposite side, which you'll probably see later. So that was kind of like a downfall of not having that kind of prepared, at least like mentally, but it's probably good to plan that out probably first as well. Another helpful thing is that if you do use the frames and border tools in Clip Studio Paint, it does section each of like the little boxes off and masks them so that whenever you click on a certain panel, it does kind of like block out everything else in this weird kind of like purpley blue faded color, so that you don't really accidentally draw outside of the border, which is great for keeping everything clean. You can kind of get like a better sense of what the final will look like in the end because you don't have like a bunch of stray lines everywhere. Now obviously people will work differently. I know traditionally you would have like things coming out of the borders and stuff, and then when you scan and clean it up you can get rid of them like at a later process. But for line art in this case, because I have my line art on a separate layer from the frame or like panel bordering, whatever you want to call it, once I start to actually do the coloring, I will be doing something else to make sure that those frames and borders are included with my line art. Now, I don't really want to skip over this, so let me talk about this really quickly. I have never really used the 3D models in Clip Studio Paint, but I know a lot of people use them to help speed up their process, especially for like consistency, for comic making, and all that jazz. So I decided to see what they had in their little 3D section, and they did have one for a desk and a chair. So I think for this particular scene where Sato is grabbing the chair, as well as when she's about to sit on the chair, I decided to use the 3D model because I was kind of like unsure about how to draw the chair. I think this is also great if you have like a character alongside with the chair. You can find proportions a little bit easier. I don't really think in some other scenes that they're properly proportioned to the desk and the chair, and I think it's mostly because like one, I didn't really think about like the scene with the entirety of like the body planned out, but having the kind of model there does help a little bit for the proportioning. It also just helps speed things up. I know a lot of people use it for that as well, and you using it as kind of like your base, and then you can do your inking or sketch on top of it, and then kind of like manipulate it and change it into your own style is very helpful. So I definitely used I think there is a scene or two that has the desk in it, and then I used it for this particular scene for the chair. But other than that, I think for the inking, I did like using the Real G pen. It'd be fun to try out some other brushes, but sometimes when I use brushes that have like an immense amount of texture, or like, I don't know, I'm always like torn between using a brush that has a lot of texture, or if I want to use a brush that's very simple and more similar to a pencil, and trying my best to just like treat it like sketching instead of like line art has always been a struggle for me. And I feel like I would benefit more from like treating the line art more like my sketch, and then either doing values or coloring afterwards. But with kind of like webtoons and like more full colored comics and mangas kind of like coming up more recently in the last few years, you guys can let me know if you're like the type of person, if you've done like comic work, I guess like more so digitally, did you opt to do it more like grayscale or like limited color palette, or did you go on with doing full color? So I decided to include a little bit of footage of me doing some of the inking for Sato right here. That's like me working with the tablet, just because I feel like some people don't really realize how slow the inking process tends to be for like digital, especially because of like if you see speed paints and time lapses and stuff and it's whipping by so quickly, I feel like it's sometimes hard to gauge how fast a person is working. So it's very slow in my case. I don't think I'm very proficient in inking, and you can see that I do go kind of back and forth when it comes to doing adding, I guess, like line width variation or like adding values and hatching and stuff. I don't really have like this distinct nature of being able to do it automatically, like knowing where to place your thick and thin right away in one stroke. I tend to do a stroke more or less with like relatively similar line width variation, and then having to go back and darken up certain parts, or like, you know, thin out some parts by erasing with the same brush and all that. So it kind of just works out in the end, but it might be a little bit slower for me, who knows. But back on the topic a little bit about doing comics with either like full color, monochromatic, or like a limited color palette, I'm still gonna juggle with the idea. I do think it would be fun to do like a full colored comic, but it seems a little bit daunting. So, okay. So let me talk about this a little bit. I ended up rearranging all of my layers so that I would select basically the entirety of our line art minus the, I think it's the, what is it called? The flat whites of each panel, so that they don't have that merged on with the line art, so our line art is like transparent. After I do that, I put them all in a folder. I will also rasterize that folder so that we have all of our lines on one layer, and I'm able to edit it so that I can change that layer to be color instead of grayscale, and change it to this kind of like reddish pinkish color for all of our lines instead of having it as a flat black. So while I'm filling in some of the colors with art pink, you can see like every so often it will change to be like a mid-tone gray. And the reason being is because of the setting that I set at the very beginning, where I set the comic to be gray instead of being full color. So to minimize that headache, I highly recommend try to plan out whether or not you're going to be doing full color or grayscale. I definitely think if you set it to color, you can easily change it to grayscale, but the other way around is a little bit more annoying in my opinion, because it's automatically set that way, while you can manually set gray quite easily, versus like the other way where it's like you do have to set each individual layer to be color instead of gray, rather than if you have it on color, you can just pick the color gray and color it in. So like I mentioned earlier, the kind of like the reason why I merged and rasterized my line art to be on one layer. Now I do have all of the line art and like the frames and the borders and stuff still available. I've just hidden those for now, and I'm mainly using the one rasterized line art layer. And the reason being is that being able to select and keep all of my lines and my colors contained was much more necessary than keeping all of my things on separate layers. So I mentioned earlier that I did like the fact that when you click on a certain panel, it will kind of like isolate it for you and you can draw within it without exiting outside of the borders. Now, because of that, it kind of gives you like a false illusion that your lines are going to be closed, but they're all left open and you just can't see them. So it's easier for me to merge my borders and my line art together so that I still have things closed when I decide to use the fill bucket tool. If I want to select anything, then I don't really have to worry about that. But as for the coloring goes, I pretty much kept it as a 3-colored color palette. So I've chosen a light pink, a mid-tone pink, and we have like our dark reddish color for our line work. Every so often for certain objects like the walls, the doors, the desks, and like any of the objects, I decided to put this weird texture over top of it. And similar to our frames and borders from before, I do have to rasterize this layer, change it to color, and then set it to overlay so that it can overlay on top of our objects. But I did notice that it did change the value of some of my colors because I did set it to overlay. So I ended up knocking it back to about 50% opacity. So it still is kind of in the same color palette range without making it look too saturated or too dark. Ooh, I think I forgot to give you context for the comic in general. So basically, out of all my OCs, Akemi and Sato are my only couple. So I wanted to draw out their little confession scene, I guess in this case, for Valentine's Day and kind of make it more like pink aesthetic. So kind of like at the very beginning, I think of like their high school year, they end up being in the same like homeroom, classroom basically, and they start to get to know each other. And then by the end of their first year, Sato ends up basically confessing to Akemi in a very accidental-ish kind of way, which is kind of like depicted in the comic. But kind of to give a little bit more context about Akemi, I kind of imagined that he would be the type to like probably pick up Anka from school, but maybe their school time doesn't align. So he spends like an extra hour after school in the classroom just studying, and he often has like his earbuds in, but little does Sato know, Akemi is very like used to Sato coming in and kind of like hanging out with him, spending time with him, and just like chatting and hanging out while he studies. So he often doesn't play music while she's here so that they could talk. And I feel like even if you put your earphones or headphones, earbuds in, I feel like Sato would be the type to talk to you regardless. Like she's very much like a people person. So I guess like Sato would be kind of unaware that Akemi is actually not really listening to music because they tend to talk during this time, I guess. So she thinks he can't really hear him, so she just blurts out that she likes him, and in the end he wasn't really playing any music. So yeah, I think I just wanted like a cute way of doing this because I feel like that's how their relationship would be. It wouldn't be like something super big and bold or like, you know, call them out being like, hey, after school, come meet me behind the courtyard or whatever because they need to confess, or it's not like a rooftop confession or anything like that. I feel like gradually they get closer. I don't know, maybe I'm just like that type that always liked the feeling of like not having a very like abrupt confession. Technically, I do like things to be like slow, and I feel like it works out for these two because maybe, I don't know, Akemi is definitely more easygoing, so maybe that's why I kind of wanted to treat the pacing of their confession like this. I know like during the actual comic portion of this, I didn't depict it the best in terms of the pacing, so I'll try my best to get better at it as I do more little mini comics, but for now, I'm gonna still experiment with how I want the style and everything to look like. Hopefully you guys liked today's video though, and as I rambled through the little depiction of everything, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video though. Bye! Also, happy Valentine's Day even though it's very late. Bye!